Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Waterbury, Connecticut, February 17th, 2025, 8:42 p.m. Typically, stories about the proverbial evil stepmother are the things of children's fairy tales, but something people need to remember is that those stories like Hansel and Gretel and Cinderella and others were based on the kind of savagery that was happening in Europe at the time, and we still see it today. On the evening of February 17th, firefighters responded to a 911 call about an active fire. Inside the home in question, they found a man who they rescued. He was coughing from smoke inhalation and suffering from injuries. He was severely malnourished, to the point that the firefighters had to carry him out. He was the stepson of the woman who owned the house. The stepson was 32 years old, and even though he was 5'9", he only weighed a shocking 68 pounds. The emaciated man admitted that he was the one who set the fire, as a way to summon help. He said that he had used a lighter, hand sanitizer, and printed paper. When the authorities asked him why he set fire to the house, he said he wanted his freedom. The man's stepmother owned the house. She was there at the time of the fire, but she refused to speak to the police. The man was brought to a nearby hospital where the police said he was intubated and diagnosed with cachexia, or wasting syndrome, a form of severe physical deterioration normally found in patients with conditions like advanced cancer. When investigators asked him if he had ever experienced hunger, he said, "All day, every day, my entire life." So, he was being kept in a state of perpetual torture is what this is. He had a life-threatening body mass index of 11 and appeared to be near starvation. He had a decreased ability to use his arms and legs or to even twist his torso. Court documents said he was suffering from depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that he was functioning at an adolescent cognitive level. Police say that this man had been held captive by his stepmother since he was 11 years old, in a room that was only 8 by 9 feet, without heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer. The door to the room had a lock on it, one that police say had been changed a number of times over the decades. The victim told first responders that after he had set the fire, his stepmother and another person whose identity was redacted in the court documents had gotten him out of the room, but only for the purposes of rushing to try to wash his face and try to clean him up as quickly as they could. His stepmother and this unnamed person had even tried to remove the slide bolt lock from the outside of the door frame in an effort to keep firefighters from realizing what this stepmother had been doing. Now, I'm not going to disgust you with all the details of how this tragic individual was forced to endure 22 hours a day locked in a space the size of a closet for 2 decades and being systematically starved for his entire life. But I will give you just a few of the examples of the evils that were taking place in plain sight. Starting at age 3, the victim remembered sneaking out of his room at night to scour for leftover food or anything to drink. He began to be locked in his room during the evenings when food wrappings were discovered. He would leave the house to go to school, but he would be locked in his room as soon as he came home, he said. He was given so little food and water that when he was let out, he would drink from the toilet bowl, beg or steal food from other children in class, or forage for scraps in the trash cans at school. Now, with this kind of behavior going on, you're probably thinking there's no way that nobody knew about this and that nobody noticed what this child was going through. And you would be right.
We knew it. We reported it. Not a damn thing was done. That's the tragedy of the whole thing.
Tom Pannone hasn't seen the alleged victim since he was in 4th grade in the early 2000s, but says he always knew something was wrong. He was the principal at the now closed Barnard Elementary School and says he and his staff noticed that the child was extremely small and thin. He says when they asked him questions, the boy told them he wasn't allowed food at times at the house.
Everyone really was concerned with this child since he was 5 years old. You knew something was wrong. It was grossly wrong.
He says teachers would even bring food in for the student. He says he and his team made multiple calls to his stepmom, Kimberly Sullivan, and called the Department of Children and Families at least 20 times. The arrest warrant says the student was told to lie and say everything was fine. But by 5th grade, he never came back to school.
You don't disappear off the face of the earth at 10 years old.
Pannone was told the student was enrolled in Wolcott schools, but he couldn't find any records of that. He was also told at one point the boy was homeschooled.
So the school's principal knew about it. The teachers knew about it. They brought this child food because they knew that he was being starved. It was the school personnel who had contacted the state's Department of Children and Families to report this abuse. But those guys from the state, they visited the family home on 2 occasions, they claimed, and they talked to the child and was told that everything's fine as far as they were concerned. Okay, nothing wrong here. And apparently nobody cared when this child didn't return to school after the DCF's second visit. At this point, he had been in the 4th grade, but after that, a more intense period of captivity began. Once he was pulled from school, his weekday routine became brutally consistent for the remainder of his captivity. The stepson was locked away for several hours every day except for when he was allowed to complete various chores that took anywhere between 15 minutes and 2 hours to complete. On weekends, the victim's father allowed him to watch television or pitch in with yard work while the stepmother and the victim's sisters were out. Now, did you catch that? The victim wasn't just in the clutches of this evil stepmother alone. His own father was in on it too, and his sisters knew about it, and possibly other relatives as well. His immediate family all knew what was happening to him. They were seeing it, but not one of them intervened. The victim had lived with both his father and stepmother, but following the father's death in 2024, things got even worse for the victim. He was then only being given up to 2 sandwiches a day, 2 small bottles of water, and maybe a little bit of tuna fish. When the authorities asked him why he never told anyone about his situation, he said that he was scared that he would be locked into that closet permanently and given even less food than the meager amount that he had received. Court documents say that his stepmother threatened that if he ever told anyone, he would never see the light of day. So what he was saying is that he was scared that if he did tell anyone, then the authorities wouldn't actually do anything, and he would be stuck with this vengeful, hateful demon that he was trapped with. That's what he was afraid of. Even if he talked, nothing would be done about it. And it turned out he was right. You would expect that faced with this ghastly circumstance on February 17th, the police immediately arrested this satanic female for this horrifying crime. And you would be wrong because genetic immunity from law is real. The police decided to wait another month before they finally decided that maybe they ought to charge this woman with something. They arrested 56-year-old Kimberly Sullivan, who is now facing 5 criminal charges, including first-degree assault, second-degree kidnapping, first-degree unlawful restraint, cruelty, and first-degree reckless endangerment. She was given bond of $300,000, which she posted almost immediately, and she is, of course, denying everything along with her lawyers. Now, there have been instances like this that have happened in other communities other than this one, but the first time that somebody reports it, say if it happens in the black community, those kids are going to be immediately snatched up and put into CPS. Even in cases where there's no physical abuse, it's only too easy to have black children removed from their parents on a mere accusation or just suspicion. So how was this incident allowed to go on and on and on for 20 years? Once this child was pulled from that school, that was the end of the state's interest in him. No follow-up, no questions about why this child was suddenly no longer going to school, no nothing, as if the authorities decided that he no longer existed. How could they allow this? For the same reason that Dante Hart and his siblings were able to be systematically starved and abused, even after they had been in nationwide headlines when their so-called foster parents forced them to act like they loved the police. You see, these sick degenerates from the dominant society love to psychologically torture children, and nothing is ever done about it. That lets them indulge all of their sick whims. That's what was happening here. This is why it's profoundly disturbing when we find black children getting adopted by the dominant society. And it's not just mental degenerates in the sticks or in the suburbs who abuse black adoptees with impunity. Steven Spielberg adopted a black girl, and come to find out years later she admitted to having been sexually abused for years. And while Spielberg was never accused of anything, the question is, how did such a rich, famous, high-profile man like him have a situation with a girl in his custody who was being abused, and allegedly he didn't know anything about it? Whenever black children get adopted by certain people, we find all of this evil, degenerate behavior going on. This makes it clear that this is the reason they want to get their hands on children in the first place. People are going to need to accept that there's individuals in this world who simply want nothing more than to indulge their own satanic, sadistic whims on people. You don't torture a child from the day that they're a toddler up until their 30s simply because you didn't know any better. You do it because you want to. There's evil in this world, but the white media refuses to put a face on it. So this Sullivan woman isn't the only one who practices depraved indifference for life. And of course, the thugs in blue are patting themselves on the back. The same individuals who did absolutely nothing about this for 20 years and who didn't even bother to make an arrest for a month, but they want to take credit for how hard they worked on this case. When the truth of the matter was, the victim saved himself. Just ridiculous. The thugs in blue never miss a chance to take any tragedy and try to make it all about themselves. People do terrible things to each other, but it's even worse when they know that there's a media that refuses to look at them, a government that refuses to touch them, and a society that refuses to judge them. So if you're wondering how this kind of animalistic cruelty was allowed to go on for so long, the answer is tragically simple. The only thing required for this kind of evil to exist and persist is that the people who society entrusted to do something about it refuse to. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Hildeman Gallo, Mark Anderson, Andrew Lewis, Universal UC, and Tomorrow Boyd. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.